Those events of Jesus feeding more than 5,000 people in that one sitting is quite remarkable and just has so much in it that goes beyond just a mass catering miracle. There's so much more in that. And as we just mentioned, remember, John is always pointing towards who Jesus is in everything that he writes down. Every episode, it's all about Jesus revealing who he is to those around him, even if they don't get it, and to us as readers of the story. And that is pretty much at the heart of the entirety of this really long and sometimes confusing and difficult chapter. From the very start, Jesus knew what he was doing. That's what it says. He already had in mind what he was going to do. But he asks his disciples what they could do to feed such a large crowd. And seeing the size of the task, the disciples' response is understandably a worldly one, I'm sure. It certainly is for me whenever I'm faced with a task. Maybe it is for you. And they say 8 months' wages couldn't feed this many people. And now we could get into the maths of what that equates to in daily fees and everything like that, but essentially it's a phrase which says we can't afford to buy food for 5,000 people. It's just far too big. The task is too big for us. Then Andrew, who we've already come across, and with this unfortunate kind of name, Simon Peter's brother, that's what he's known as. Again, this bringer to Jesus brings someone else to Jesus, a small boy with a meager offering of food. We know it from many choruses and children's songs. 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. But this couldn't make a difference on its own, could it? But in Jesus' hands, the need is met and so much more, to the point of 12 basketfuls left over at the end. So at the end of this, everyone has seen the demonstration of Jesus' power. They have full bellies and they think Jesus is ace. So ace, in fact, that they conclude that he must be the prophet that we've been waiting for. The one since Deuteronomy chapter 18, the successor to Moses, the one who John the Baptist at the beginning denies being. I'm not the prophet or the Messiah. And the crowd make this leap from this must be the prophet to this must be the Messiah, so let's make him king. But let's make him king by force. And this is not Jesus' way. And also it's another sign of the fact that they just haven't got who he really is. That they want him to take the throne by force, because then they will be a free people again from underneath the boot of Rome. There's an awful lot of puzzling about Jesus' identity by the crowd. They're really impressed by the food miracle, but yet they're confused by his disappearance from the scene and then his reappearance on the other side of the lake. Even though they knew he hadn't got into the boat that went across, but yet he was there. We, of course, know that Jesus has walked on the water. And then the next part of the episode is Jesus engaging with those fans of his who are pursuing him because of what he can do for them. And this is the engagement that Jesus gives some really tough and confusing teaching, even for us. But to help us, John has given us a clue. In verse 4 of chapter 6, he reminds us then that it was almost Passover time. Now, Passover occurs maybe 3 times in the Gospel of John, and knowing John, this detail is not just a word filler for his kind of word count at the end of his document. There is a scene setting going on, and it's not just a time scene setting. It's not just there and then that he's talking about. He's referring to a bigger picture. So whenever he refers to Passover, especially to his first readers and laterally to us, it would bring to mind the great rescue God performed through Moses when he led the people out of bondage in Egypt, through the Red Sea, through the desert, providing food for them, often miraculously, and then leading them to be his people, his new community in the promised land, this set of a 12-tribe nation. There are a number of parallels with Passover and the story around the deliverance of the people of Israel and the chapter that we're looking at in John. Jesus is seen to be walking on the water, And that has the parallel with the splitting of the Red Sea. The sea was seen as a dark, foreboding, and dangerous place, both physically and spiritually, especially in a storm. And here we have Jesus in the midst of a storm, not just causing the storm to calm, not just causing the sea to part, but actually walking on top of the surface of the water. But Jesus also then, once the disciples have experienced this, they're immediately at the other side of the lake, and the crowd gathers again in their confusion. They're wanting to make Jesus their king, but Jesus has to address their understanding, and he does that by drawing attention to that one particular picture, the bread. Now, in the story of the deliverance of Israel, God gives the Israelites manna from heaven, what's known as the bread from heaven. And for me, as a rugby fan, I immediately think of the Welsh massed voice choirs at the Millennium Stadium or Cardiff Arms Park singing Bread of Heaven, and that great hymn, Bread of Heaven, feed me till I want no more, which does sound a little bit like force feeding. But anyway, what Jesus is getting at, he is pointing out that he is more than Moses, more than the prophet, more than the one to give them the victory they wanted to give a free Israel. When Jesus offers the bread from heaven, everyone wants it, but they still don't get it. They just think it's some kind of bread like God gave in the desert. So Jesus says it plainly in the first of one of the I am sayings which occur throughout John. He says, I am the bread of life. Now remember, that phrase I am is in itself really pregnant with what it means. I am is the name of God, Yahweh. I am the bread of life. Jesus is telling the crowds that he is more than who they think he is, more than Moses, more than the provider of miraculous bread. He is the bread from heaven. He is the sustenance from heaven. He is the bread. He is the wine. He is the gift from God. He is what people need to feed on, not the results of his work, not his actions, not what he can do for them, but him himself. And this is mega confusing for people, especially when he talks about eating his flesh. It sounds cannibalistic. What is he on about? Now, we can't get away from the echoes of the Last Supper that's ahead of him and our communion remembrance of Jesus' death. We can't get away from that. There's something going on of remembrance of that. And what it is all about is that Jesus is the one who can give real life, who can give eternal life. And only by feeding on him, what that means is believing who he is. By doing that, that's how we can access this life. And throughout this entire encounter, which incidentally, if we see in verse 59, has moved from the shore into the synagogue, the teaching place in Capernaum, Jesus is saying he's not only more than Moses, but he's more than providing the bread to the 5,000. He's saying he is God. He is doing what God, his Father, did. And this is all too much for the people, especially for those who know his family. They were saying, isn't this Joseph's son? So lots of those who followed him, it's not the 12, it's those who gathered around him, they leave him. This teaching's too hard. He's gone too far. And then on asking the 12, it's Peter who gets it, kind of. And Peter's response is amazing. He says, essentially, what other options have we got? You have the words that are full of life eternal. You are the Holy One of God. There's still a long way to go for those around him, for Peter and his disciples to really understand what that means, who Jesus really is. Peter's confession only grasps some of Jesus' identity. See, the crowds were interested in Jesus because of what he could do for them, their hopes, their dreams, their expectations, what they could get out of Jesus, whether it's a fish sandwich or whether it's freedom from the Romans. Jesus is saying he is so much more than a means to an end, so much more than what he can give us, what we can get out of him. He is the real bread from heaven. He is the bread of life. He is the bread that gives life beyond the here and now. The bread of eternity, the bread of heaven.